Good evening. You're watching the news on Croatian television. Prime Minister Andrej Plenković arrived in Mostar this evening. The goal of his visit is to send a clear message of support to Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, following the ICTY's guilty verdict in the war crimes case of 6 Bosnian Croats.
Croatia first and foremost stands together with Bosnia and Herzegovina and with Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We will do everything to ensure that Croats are an equal and long-term constituent people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The equality among these 3 constituent peoples here is respected. Our bilateral activities and those on the international scene are working towards that goal. We will spend today and tomorrow together and discuss a number of issues, including the ICTY ruling, but also a number of other issues regarding the position of the Croatian people in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Before leaving for Mostar, the Prime Minister reiterated that Croatia will respect the tribunal's ruling, but rejects those segments alluding to responsibility on the part of the Croatian leadership during the war.
It is very important to listen closely to what we are saying. The possibility of a revision of the ruling itself must come from one of the 5 condemned. That's the first thing. Should that happen, then in that case, Croatia can once again request some form of involvement, be it as amicus curiae or in some other form. The other option we have is, as you know, a special thematic debate in the UN Security Council is scheduled for 2 days from now, at which the work of the Hague Tribunal will be summed up. The President is in New York, and she will present political and legal assessments of the Tribunal's work, with a review of this last verdict.
President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović has arrived in Boston, where she will lecture on Croatian foreign policy at Tufts University. Tomorrow she will meet with Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and on Wednesday she will participate in a thematic session of the UN Security Council on the work of the Hague Tribunal. Meanwhile, the results of the autopsy of General Slobodan Praljak's body has confirmed that he poisoned himself with potassium cyanide in the ICTY courtroom. It remains unclear whether his body is still in the Netherlands, and if it is, whether it will have to remain there until the end of the investigation.
The investigation will focus on internal operations. We will first and foremost deal with the tribunal's existing procedure, whether they were respected or not. Were they adequate for these kinds of situations, specifically in this case, for which we all saw what happened.
Authorities in Bosnia and Herzegovina have arrested 13 Bosnian Muslims under suspicion of war crimes committed against Serb civilians in the village of Bradina in 1992. The former members of the Bosnian army and police are suspected of murder, rape, torture, and forced deportation.
The people arrested have been transferred to the State Investigation and Protection Agency here in eastern Sarajevo, where they're being processed. They will then be transferred to the State Prosecutor's Office for further processing.
Speaking at an international conference hosted by the Croatian National Bank today, Finance Minister Zdravko Marić said that Croatia had profited from the EU's economic growth. He added that while Croatia's economic growth could have been stronger, a lot had been achieved and that government would continue to implement reforms.
Our efforts and results have been recognized primarily by the European Commission and European Union. This year, Croatia exited the excessive deficit procedure, and we are now in that group of countries, the biggest group, in the so-called preventive mechanism. For us, this means that there is still plenty of work to be done, so that we don't fall back into that corrective mechanism, but instead make an additional step forward so that we can all agree that our finances are entirely sustainable.
Meanwhile, National Bank Governor Boris Vujicic supported the minister with regard to implementing reforms, especially in the public administration, healthcare, and education sectors. He also agreed that Croatia's EU membership had given the economy a boost, especially in terms of exports.
It isn't simply the price factor which has resulted in a growth of exports, and it most definitely wasn't foreign investment, because at that stage of the crisis there weren't any. So what remains? The effect of joining the EU as the primary determining factor for this kind of growth in exports, and ultimately recovery.
The Večernji list and Poslovni dnevnik dailies handed out their annual Entrepreneur of the Year awards today. Luxury car manufacturer Mate Rimac and the CEO of the Valmar tourism company, Željko Kukurin, are this year's recipients. The key events of the year were the adoption of the Lex Agrokor legislation and the EU approving funds for the construction of the Pelješac Bridge.
It seems to me that this recognition is yet further proof that the government's response to the Agrokor crisis at the time was well placed.
Awards are always welcome, but they are simply a byproduct. I feel that other companies in contention here today have a much larger contribution to the measurable economy. After all, we are still a small and relatively young company in the early stages of our development.
Speaking after the event, Prime Minister Plenković announced a 5% increase in the minimum wage as of the new year. This means a pay hike for some 50,000 workers. He also announced tax cuts for employers.
We are striving to ensure that this will be approximately 43% of the average salary, meaning 5% right now, and we will continue with this trend in the years ahead. As far as taxes for employers, we will reduce their burden by 50%, and in that way their total gross expenditures on this will be lower than it is today. We will adopt this on Thursday, giving employers time to plan out their entire year by January 1st, which is important.
Meanwhile, the president of the Croatian Employers Association believes that government's quick and decisive response to the Agrokor case and the record tourist season were the driving forces in stabilizing the economy and achieving growth in 2017. She warned, however, that without continued reforms, Croatia will not be able to achieve sustained growth.
Forecasts say that we won't return to a pre-crisis level of GDP until 2019. Let me be clear, this is a failure for every government that led the country from the start of the crisis up until now.
Taking a quick look at sports, in the final game of the 18th round of play in the Domestic Football League, Istra beat Rudeš 2-1 this evening. Dinamo is currently first in the standings with 44 points. Followed by Hajduk and Osijek with 32 points each. Istra and Rudeš are at the bottom of the table with 16 and 12 points respectively. And now the forecast for tomorrow. Variable cloud cover in the interior with some mild precipitation primarily in the morning and evening in central and eastern parts of the country. There will be some morning fog in some places, predominantly sunny on the coast. There will be a moderate to strong northerly and northeasterly on the Adriatic. Morning lows of -6 to -1 degrees Celsius inland, 2 to 7 on the coast, will give way to highs of 3 to 6 degrees in the interior, 8 to 11 in the Istrian and Dalmatian hinterland, and 11 to 14 on the coast. The 3-day forecast calls for warmer weather except in those areas with lingering fog. Predominantly dry on Wednesday and most of Thursday, however southerly winds will bring new precipitation, starting in the mountains and spreading to the rest of the interior by Friday evening. Looking ahead to the weekend, expect colder temperatures and snow at higher elevations. The coast will see stable and sunny weather on Wednesday. Cloud cover will begin to move in on Thursday, with a chance of some morning fog as well. The northern Adriatic could see some light rain on Thursday. This will spread to the rest of the coast on Friday, which will see southerly winds, heavier rains, and thunderstorms. And that wraps up the news. Be sure to join us again tomorrow night.